This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. Hope you're all doing well here in the beginning of September. Summer is just about behind us, which is just fine with me. And in a moment, going to be joined by my co-host, Brian Solomon. And we're also going to be joined by PWI Editor-in-Chief Kevin McElvaney for a discussion of what is pretty much the biggest issue of the year for us, the PWI 500. By now, you're probably aware that it is out, available now for digital download. Some discussion of it last week on AEW Dynamite, and we're going to break it all down here in just a moment, discuss the top 10, and feature an interview with our number one ranked wrestler. Yes, it's AEW champion Jon Moxley. I had the honor of talking to the champ about his number one ranking in the PWI 500, and as you'd expect, he handled it in a very Jon Moxley kind of way. Seemed a little nonplussed, but also, speaking to him, digging a little deeper, you could tell that this was a lifelong wrestling fan for whom the PWI 500 has meant something for a long time, and I think he's genuinely honored and privileged to be at the top of the list. Talks a lot about it. I thought it was really interesting and talked to him about this now meaning that all members of The Shield, him, Seth Rollins, and Roman Reigns, have all topped the PWI 500. He talks a bit about what that says about the three of them as a unit and individually, and we talk about a lot more. A portion of this is included in the magazine in our Hotseat interview accompanying the PWI 500 list. There's a lot more here in the full interview, which we will listen to in just a moment after we talk to Kevin and Brian to break down the list. Before we do all of that, very quickly, let me tell you about how you could get the issue, the PWI 500, and really any other issue. As I say, it is our busy season, and certainly the PWI 500 is about as big an issue as we put out all year. I think it's real kind of destination issue, tentpole issue, even for, I think, sort of casual fans of the magazine. Maybe only pick up one or two issues a year. I know when I was a kid, didn't have a whole lot of money and could only pick up a few issues a year. This was one that I would never miss, the PWI 500. I believe this is now in its 30th year, started in 1991. Here we are in 2020. So the 30th edition of the PWI 500. There is about 80 pages of coverage of the 500 in here, including the entire 500 list. Bigger takeouts, bios for the top 10, our hot seat interview with Jon Moxley, this year's number one, a take from a few of the writers, myself included, Harry Burkett, and this year we're introducing a new voice to the takes, and that is Righteous Reg. Definitely a different PWI 500 than you've seen in the past. Part of that, I think, is a sign of the times and the world that we're living in. Part of it is a reflection of our new leadership at PWI under Kevin McElvaney. But I think certainly a historic issue, one you don't want to miss. And so you don't miss it, go to PWI-online.com and pick it up, either the one issue or, better yet, go ahead and subscribe and make sure you don't miss any other big issues we've got coming out right after this, where we're already hard at work at the Women's 100, which is sort of the female counterpart to the PWI 500. And we've got something else potentially in the works that might make it sort of the trilogy of rankings, but we'll speak about that another day. But right now, you could be digging into the 2020 PWI 500. Go to PWI-online.com, download it right now, customize for your digital device, or pre-order the print edition. Certainly, if you're a magazine collector, this is one that you're going to want to have in your hand, on your coffee table, maybe next to the toilet. I've been known to keep a few of them there as well. And whatever the case, wherever you keep your PWI, go to PWI-online.com and pick it up. Also, while you've got that computer open, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a good review. We certainly appreciate it. You could also feel free to send us an email either here at the podcast, PWI Podcast @outlook.com, or PWI @kappapublishing.com. Follow us in social media, Twitter, @officialPWI. That's also our handle on Instagram. Find us on Facebook. Find us on YouTube. We've been more and more active in getting some videos, some fun roundtables up on our YouTube channel. Pick up the t-shirt, or t-shirts, as it is, at ProWrestlingTees.com. We've got a line now of PWI t-shirts, including a brand new PWI 500, a couple PWI 500 shirts as well. So recognizing the significance, the importance of the PWI 500 brand, we've got a couple new t-shirts out that I think you're going to love. So go to ProWrestlingTees.com to pick them up. Okay, joined now by my co-host, PWI contributing writer Brian Solomon. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing okay, Al. How you doing?
Good. And also joined by PWI Editor-in-Chief and Chris Jericho's favorite moron, Kevin McElvaney. How are you, Kevin?
Good. Good to be here. Good to have that still going on.
Yeah, and of course I'm referencing Chris Jericho mentioning you as part of AEW's promotion of the 2020 PWI 500. Their champion, Jon Moxley, tops the list this year. We're going to talk about all that in just a moment. Before we do that, Brian, it's been a few weeks since we've spoken. Since then, we've had 2 WWE pay-per-views and a lot of news, certainly pertaining to Roman Reigns, who made his surprise return at SummerSlam. A few days later, aligned with Paul Heyman, and a couple days after that, wins the Universal Championship, and ostensibly is a heel now. So that's a lot of development since we've last talked. I wanted to check in with you, get your thoughts on all of that. Were you satisfied with the presentation, and how much of a potential difference maker is this for a company that could really use some freshening up?
Yeah, I'm really on board for the Roman Reigns heel turn. In fact, I think my biggest complaint about it is it probably should have happened like 2 or 3 years ago. They just didn't want to let go of this hopeless case of making him the next John Cena. And I always felt like the one thing that was holding them back from pulling the trigger was the same reason they never turned Cena, was that they always felt like they needed somebody else to do the kind of public relations and kiss babies and all that stuff. And now they have Drew McIntyre, so they can safely do that. At least that's the way that I see it. I think it's a great way to freshen him up. I think having him with Heyman is fantastic. I mean, I hope they follow through on it. I just think, like, just looking at it from now, it's a great idea, and it's kind of what needed to be done with his character. It's just like it's like a Daniel Bryan thing where they're playing into the real life, opinions of fans and things like that. And I just think it's a really smart thing to do. I hope that it works. I really hope that it does, because I think that it has a lot of potential. I really do.
Yeah, I largely agree. I like the way they brought him back. The surprise at the end of SummerSlam made what was otherwise a fine but kind of mundane show feel more special. The introduction of Paul Heyman and the heel turn as it was, I'm more than happy with him being cast as a heel. I don't know if they got everything out of it. I think we were missing that, and maybe it's because that moment happened backstage at a SmackDown with no fans, and maybe it's inevitable. It's the best you could do, but I don't know that they got the most out of it because there wasn't that shocking moment, anything like that. But yeah, I think, on one hand, right, you can bring up they could have done this years ago, but they could also do it now, and it certainly works right now. My concern, as I've had all along, is, so now you've got a huge heel champion in Roman Reigns, who is the babyface hero that eventually unseats him. And you mentioned McIntyre, and I think he's fine. He's on the Raw brand. On SmackDown, it's hard to pinpoint who that person is. They're so kind of heel heavy right now. And on the babyface side, pretty weak. It's sort of intriguing to see them give Big E this push. Is Big E the guy who eventually works his way up to the top of the card to challenge and unseat Roman Reigns? Daniel Bryan is there. I guess he's on a break right now. Just had a baby. I don't know that he's the guy to unseat him, but I think there's potential for some great matches there. They had a few years ago, and the matches were surprisingly, I shouldn't say they're surprisingly good. I should say their chemistry was surprisingly good. They really meshed well together, so I'd be happy to see that again. Kevin, and any thoughts on this latest? I don't know if it's a reboot. You could call it kind of a desperation tactic, but it's also one that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways.
Specifically, well, Roman, I guess start with Roman generally. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea. Like Brian said, kind of overdue. But it's the shot in the arm his character needed. And I think, at some point we'll see him be a fan favorite again. But I mean, I keep thinking of The Rock. People just couldn't stand him because he was shoved so much down their throats, right? And then now here's Roman Reigns. Okay, they're finally going to give in and turn him heel. Granted, it took a lot longer. But I think long term this is great for him, and certainly short term it's more entertaining. And I mean, in terms of who challenges him, I mean it is pretty wide open. I could certainly see Big E doing it. Matt Riddle's also getting a little bit of a rub there, so maybe him. I think Big E is maybe more of a feel good story, especially with both of his teammates being sidelined, and it's kind of years in the making. Like he's had the potential to be a single star, but he's been focused on tag team competition. So like now he actually has, I mean, he's almost forced into it, but of course has the blessing of his teammates. I think that's a cool story. Whether or not that can be played out all the way to WrestleMania, I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be a question of, but maybe it doesn't have to be, is another thing. I mean, it could be a few months from now. But personally, I see the way Roman is now, and he's just starting, especially aligning himself with Heyman, to really catch his stride. So I see him holding the title for a while here. You're going to have some rematches. He's going to be, defending it obviously against The Fiend, against Braun Strowman. So in that way, you have a while to get to him against Big E. I'm just curious how they keep Big E viable that entire time. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but the company has not been as good at this long-term storytelling the past few years, so that's a concern.
Brian, do you think Big E's singles push is off to a good start? How would you sort of evaluate what they've done so far?
I do, and I wanted to say even part of the bigger picture. I put a tweet out on the PWI Twitter just because I felt so strongly about it that I thought Payback was such a step in the right direction in terms of giving these singles pushes to guys that need it and having established guys really doing the honors. Like I really think that's so important. And so what happened with Sheamus and Big E is sort of like the beginning, I think, of something really good. I think that the answer to the question of how do they keep him hot over that time is keep doing what they did. Like he can go through several people like Sheamus where it's like, oh my God, Big E just beat blank. Like they can keep doing that. And keep him strong. I always felt like he was, and I mean, this is not some unique opinion, but he was the guy out of New Day that had the most potential as a major main event star. I think it's definitely time. I think if they really handle it right, and that's a big if, like we talk about all the time, that really could be your WrestleMania main event. I mean, there was buzz talking about like trying to get The Rock to come back and face Roman Reigns. I don't even think they need him. If they, I mean, yeah, it would be great, but I don't think they need him. If they handle it right, that could be a huge WrestleMania main event. Not tomorrow, but by the time they get to WrestleMania, that could be really, really big. I would love to see that, something new, something different, right? That's what we always criticize them for not doing.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to bring up The Rock. I guess there was another little bit of an exchange between Roman and The Rock. But that was with the assumption that it would take place in California as it was originally planned. I'd say that's very tenuous right now. If I can't see, what are we, 7-8 months away from WrestleMania? 70,000 people packed in a stadium even then. So I don't think it'll quite be another Performance Center WrestleMania, but it might be a Thunderdome WrestleMania. In which case, I just don't see The Rock participating in something like that. But even, John Cena, at one time that was as marquee a match as there was, John Cena and Roman Reigns. They kind of wasted it on some off-brand pay-per-view several years ago. I remember I don't know if you guys even remember them doing that, but it was a throwaway. And a real shame, but that's a WrestleMania a main event. Not in that case, I think you put Roman over pretty strongly because John Cena is not the long-term solution, but it's a marquee match for sure. But I'd like to see where they go with Big E. I think he's for the time, especially in an interesting case, potentially a real inspirational story, and putting all that aside, just a guy who has more than earned a shot, if nothing else. And maybe it doesn't work out. But how many years does he have now in the company? It's got to be 10 years. I don't know if it's quite that long, but I remember back in WrestleMania 29 here in New York, he was like Dolph Ziggler's second, right? And that was 2013, so that's 7 years ago. And not getting any younger. I mean, if nothing else, that's one thing that is so evident is WWE needs to go with some youth right now. Even these new acts that they're pushing, the Matt Riddles and the Big E's in the world. You're talking guys who are in their mid to late 30s. So even if you went all the way with them right now, you wouldn't get that long a run before those guys are, they joined that 40 club. So, but still, it's better than the folks already in the 40 club. Anyhow, let's shift to the PWI 500. That's why we're all together to talk here. Kevin, before we go into the top 10, I want to ask you about putting together your first PWI 500. You've been involved with them in the past as a writer. This year, you took the helm, and it's a different PWI 500. I think unapologetically so, right? I mean, there's it's from a lot of different angles, who we ranked, who we didn't rank, what we prioritized. It's got a different feel than past years. Can you talk a bit about that experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, for starters, it was stressful. It was difficult. Stu had asked me before we knew that I was going to be taking over his role, essentially if I wanted to take over Dan's role, Dan Murphy, who has been at the helm of this for, how many years? At least a decade, right? Probably closer to 2 decades.
Yeah.
And what Dan did, I mean, we have these meetings. I don't think there's really any secret of this. We don't compile the entire 500 in 1 or 2 sittings. It's done over a period of time. And somebody does really have to take the initiative to group, especially the back half of the list where there's so much research involved. You really do have to keep an awareness of what's going on. And I had been working very hard to do that this year, keeping an eye on more international promotions, more independent promotions. It is difficult, but I think you'll see some of that in the list. You'll see some of these people who have never been ranked before, who had become more prominent, whether it's through Twitter buzz or appearances at big iPay-per-views, if that term is even still used. But it was a lot to take on with what was technically my first solo issue. I consulted with him a couple of times, but I mean, purely on his own time, asked him a couple questions. Hey, what do you think about this? And graciously, Stu was, very willing to talk to me whenever I did have a question. But the first time he was not here for any of it, So it was personally, it was stressful, but I mean, rewarding. The list by and large has gotten a pretty positive response. There's number one choice was, divisive, like it kind of always is. It's almost never, even when we think this is okay, everyone's going to love this because clearly this is the number one person. There are a lot of people who beg to differ because there's a lot of weight put on that. I don't know if I hit all your points there.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. Why don't I see Brian's got his mouth full, so I don't want to ask him too much. But
I'm going to take a sip of water.
I'm okay. I'm good.
This is your first year with really a seat at the table for the PWI 500. Sort of broadly looking at the list, what's your big takeaway from it?
You're asking me?
Yes, you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I think that it's different than it's been in the past, and I mean that in a positive way. Like I know one of the concerns that people had when you're going to change up a list in this way and approach it in a different way is that, are people going to get left off that deserve to be there, or is it going to be manipulated in a way that people are higher than they deserve to be? And I really don't think any of that has happened. I think it's very fair. I think it was very thoughtfully done. I think, and this is not a knock on Stu and people that worked really, really hard on it in years before, but I think it's a big improvement. I really do. And I can't really, I will say now, I'm going to use this platform to say that I campaigned for Chris Jericho to be number one. But so I'm one of those people that will take issue with the number one. You're never going to please everybody. But I'm very, very happy with the way that it panned out. And I think the top choice is a very solid choice, meaning Jon Moxley.
And so let's talk about it. Number one this year, Jon Moxley. You touched. There have been years, and now this is now my 13th PWI 500, I think. And there have been years where it's been, everybody's in agreement right away. You come to the table, and it's the most obvious thing in the world who number one is. There's been years where there's been a lot of infighting, and even after publication, I think some second guessing by some people about who was a number one, and then some. I'd say most are somewhere in between. I feel like thinking back to that first meeting, certainly some different names came up, but I think we all felt pretty good about Jon Moxley at the end of the day, following the criteria. So, Kevin, how do you think he holds up among all the PWI 500 winners in the past? How does Jon Moxley fit in there?
So I think he's a slightly more controversial choice. Like if you have to group into, and this is only after seeing the reaction to this, because I thought he was a pretty safe choice when we went.
I thought so too.
But people have rightly pointed out that AEW is this new entity, and even though we've embraced it and looked at it as, the number 2 wrestling promotion in the world, there are a lot of people out there who are still, pretty skeptical of it. That, this is a new brand. There are people who are at the top of the card there who couldn't cut the mustard elsewhere or were, lost in the mix elsewhere. That's not entirely true. It's arguable. It's not true at all. But that perception is out there. And I think some people were reacting to that. Now, some people saying things like Moxley shouldn't even be in the top 10. Like, come on. He's the top star in this company. And not to give too much away about this clip, but I was editing a clip yesterday from the meeting where we are deciding on the top 5. And when it comes to the top spot, and we're debating the merits of Adam Cole, who was also pretty decently in consideration for the number 1 spot, versus Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley, at least in the opinion of the group overall, seemed to mean more to AEW than anybody did to WWE. And Adam Cole, of course, meant the world to NXT, but what did that mean in the grand scheme of things with WWE? So, looked at from that viewpoint, I think in a couple of years, people are going to say, no, that was Adam Cole's year. He should have won. But I think we're going to stand by Jon Moxley. Where he ranks in the overall echelon, I think he'll still be considered a controversial choice.
Yeah, I think, sometimes that lag between when we put the list together and, first there's the lag from when we put the list together until we're ready to put the magazine out. And then there's that lag time of when it comes out. So by the time you see the list, we picked him back in, I guess it would have been early July, late June, right, when we met to discuss it. And this thing's not going to be at newsstands at this point until mid-September, something like that, right? Already available digitally. Okay, so late September. So it's a big lag. I actually think this is a year where it holds up better. I think Adam Cole has, and granted, this doesn't mean a whole lot because we're working within an evaluation period, but I think Adam Cole has sort of decidedly moved down a couple of notches in NXT. That may change by tomorrow when they crown a new NXT champion that could be Adam Cole. And Jon Moxley, I think, has really sort of solidified his spot as the top guy in AEW and one of the top guys in the company. A few more title defenses under his belt. So I think Moxley holds up really well, actually. And like you said, you're always going to have the naysayers. Inevitably, the discussion ends up being about, or our debate with the naysayers always points to the criteria. It's not a popularity contest. This is not who's the best worker, who's got the best matches. The shorthand used to be for so long, it's a kayfabe list. I think it's more complex than that. And that's one very simplified way of explaining it. But I guess the better way of saying is it's a combination of who was booked the best, who delivered the most in that spot, and I think in all that criteria, Moxley was the clear number one choice. I also think, my take in the magazine, and a few of us have our takes. I talked about sort of like all current events and world events sort of converging this year. And one of the things we had to take into consideration was the pandemic and how it affected wrestlers' activity. And in a roundabout way, I think that kind of helped Moxley a little bit because AEW not running house shows was going to hurt whoever was at the top of the cards there because they weren't going to be, think about John Cena at his in his prime when he was like the guy and the champion. He was working 4 or 5 matches a week. So in a year when we were looking at his sort of resume for the year, there'd be 200 matches, and odds are he won 90% of them. Right. And so it was so hard to compete with anyone. Now it was more of kind of a level playing field because it really became about what you did on TV every week and on big matches and pay-per-views. And in that sense, Moxley was head and shoulders above everyone else. And that has a lot to do with how he was booked. WWE just isn't booking stars that strong anymore, where I think they're doing a good job with McIntyre, but that came halfway through the evaluation period. Moxley has not lost a match since he debuted in AEW. I think there was a tag match that he lost. He didn't take the pinfall, but has not lost a singles match here or in Japan. So to me, it was a slam dunk.
Well, Moxley did lose a couple of singles matches in that G1 Climax, but overall, and since his AEW debut, I believe, has not lost a singles match. But your point stands, and I think the lack of house shows really did level the playing field. But I think that has some implications for the long term as well, because if we see house shows in the future, one, it's not going to be for a long time, and two, we're not going to see nearly as many of them. The cards are going to be limited. The prestige of those shows is going to be limited. And I would wager that by the time they do come back, if they do at all, that they're going to be a lot less influential in our ratings. We're going to look at them as more of an afterthought than we may have before. I think they can be valuable in some ways, but they're certainly not as important to the business as they were. I don't know. That's probably something we're going to have to discuss a little more when it actually happens. But if I had to make a prediction now, I think this is the beginning of the end of WWE having that advantage. I really think it's going to be based more on these prominent events and weekly television shows. But I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about that.
Well, even in WWE themselves have maybe, I guess, for like the last at least 20 years have been acting like house shows don't even exist. So it's like, there's never any title changes. There's never any major storylines, basically ever since they went to a monthly pay-per-view model, which is probably like mid-90s, the house shows have really just been, it's just like the road show equivalent. It's you know what I mean? It's like going to see the circus or something. In fact, I've met a lot of casual fans who didn't even know that there were house shows. They had no idea that there were non-televised shows. And these are people that watch Raw every week. And B, bought a ticket to go to one and didn't even know what they were getting into and thought like they were going to be on TV. So, I mean, that's how low profile the house shows have come. It sort of breaks my heart a little bit because, like, I'm a big fan of house shows. We've talked about this, Al. I love going to house shows. I kind of wish they'd do more with them. Like, they'd actually change titles now and then to make people feel like they're missing out, you know. But, I mean, it is the reality. How it's treated like, if you look at it like what's in canon and what's not in canon, you know, like the way people talk about Star Wars and things like that, the house shows are not in canon. It's almost like they never happened, you know, except on the rare occasions when they did, and they have a camera there at ringside, which is almost never. So, I mean, I kind of agree with that maybe it's time to just have it be based on what's, you know, on television. I kind of, you know, it may be time to finally do that. I do want to bring up, though, one unrelated thing related to these criteria of judging. For number one, none of this explains to this day how Dean Malenko was the number one in the PWI 500. I'm scratching my head to this day on that one. I just want to put it out there. And now
I don't think we had all the same criteria. I don't even know if we. I mean, there was certainly an evaluation period, and there was a win-loss record. I don't know. I'll send you the stew on that one. I'll give you.
Sorry, it certainly wasn't as public or as finely tuned. And obviously, this predates me by a long time. But I mean, even Stu, I think would say it likely should have been Masawa who won that year, but certainly not Malenko. And that's Malenko, one of the best technical wrestlers of all time. That's no knock against him. But since when is that the criteria for number one? It's
right. I feel like that year, for some reason, it was the main criteria. I don't know.
It was, obviously.
It was. I can't imagine. No matter how great a worker, you know, a guy I love him. He's great. I love him personally. He's a great guy. He's a funny guy. But a guy that's not even a main eventer to be number one, that was just really, really strange. But anyway,
he's on my my wish list as a podcast guest, and I've got a line.
It's a good way to get him on by saying,
he is the biggest shock to me when I was working at WWE is how funny he is.
I hear that a lot.
He never got allowed to be funny. He is like an old time like Borscht Belt comedian. Like he's got one-liners. He's like a Bobby Heenan. I mean, he's not that funny, but I mean, he's hilarious. He's legitimately funny. Yeah, we should get him on. That'd be great.
Yeah. He, I wrote an obituary for a wrestler that he trained and ended up talking on the phone with him a few months ago. So maybe I'll follow up with him and see about doing that. Okay, let's work our way down the list. Jon Moxley's number one. Who is number two, Kevin?
Number two is Adam Cole. I think we alluded heavily to that if we didn't outright say.
Yeah. And that was I don't know if it was a huge debate, but it certainly. It's something that we had to talk about and kind of work out. Adam Cole had a hell of the year. He was our Wrestler of the Year for 2019 in the Achievement Awards. Why don't you talk a bit about the year that he had, Kevin?
Well, of course, I mean, he was NXT this year. So NXT became, it's the cliche that people will try it out, but NXT presented itself as no longer being a developmental brand, even if on some level that is, of course, still true. Especially with the non-televised events as they occurred. Adam Cole and Undisputed Era were the cornerstone of the show. And Adam Cole had the NXT championship the entire evaluation period, beat anybody who faced him, essentially. I mean, he had a couple of losses in non-title matches. I believe he had a singles win over Daniel Bryan. There were just incredible work in the ring, incredibly charismatic. Really just, if Moxley had even a slightly worse year, I think Cole would have been an easy choice for number one. But, you know, unfortunately for him, and he did chime in on Twitter, actually. He retweeted, actually, of all things, the clip of Chris Jericho calling me a moron and the 500 cover being shown on Dynamite. And he said something to the effect of, number two, huh? Okay, see you next year. Number one, baby. And we'll see. I mean, he's had a rough start, but I mean, it's still pretty early in the evaluation period for next year. But I really think it's hard to argue with having him in that number two spot. I mean, he really did deserve it.
Yeah. I was you touched on it, but to me, what really solidified his year, and obviously he had the title the whole year, as you talked about, but it was that build up to Survivor Series, and it wasn't just his work on the main brand. The main brands where he was showing up on Raw and SmackDown every week, working with AJ Styles, working with Daniel Bryan, and just being the MVP night after night, including through that weekend where I think he worked Friday on SmackDown, Saturday on TakeOver, and then Sunday on Survivor Series, and had like the best match on every night. I thought that was really sort of his arrival in a way. Brian, what do you think of the year that he had, and maybe some things working against him? I mean, for better or for worse, the reality is he is among the smaller top guys, not just in the business right now, but in history. You know, just you know, the whole cliche about a guy who superstars being people you've seen in the airport and they're larger than life. You can walk right by Adam Cole at an airport and not think anything. You know, you might be taller than him if you did. So how much does that work against him?
To me, it doesn't work against him at all for something like this, because I kind of go by what you had mentioned before too, where for me, it's most about how is somebody positioned? How are they being pushed? Where are they at on the card? You know, how dominant are they? I think that's the most important thing to look at. And with Cole, for me, I was happy with him being number 2. I know there was a lot of talk amongst us about making him number 1. The biggest strike for me is that, again, it comes back to positioning, because as amazing as the NXT brand is now and how it's grown and it's become more than a developmental, I don't think any of us would argue that the NXT title is the top title in WWE. And so to have somebody at the very number 1 who didn't hold the top title in their company, I would have a problem with that. That was my big thing for him. I love seeing him get as high as he got, but number 1 would have been just too much for me to justify personally for that reason.
Yeah, agreed. Who is number 3, Kevin?
Well, at number 3, we have Brian's pick for number 1, and the guy who rightly or wrongly, maybe rightly, called me a moron, Chris Jericho.
A heck of a year for Jericho. Started, his AEW run really began in the previous evaluation period. I don't think he was active enough for us to rank him at all last year. I remember Dan discussing that with him on Jericho's podcast. He had Dan on to talk about the 500. So he goes from being unranked to being number 3. And again, I think some of by our criteria, he was active enough, right? I mean, he did work enough matches, probably still a lot less than, top WWE guys or NXT guys on the list, but this was as busy a year as Jericho's had in a long, long time.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And I mean, essentially, AEW did need someone established and who was already a big star in their own merit to build the company around. I mean, as its first champion, as its top heel, leader of the Inner Circle, so many other things. Chris Jericho was that. I mean, you even look at the Jericho Cruise being this big fan event for AEW that wound up producing all this content for television. I hate calling things content. I don't know why I use that, but matches for television and segments.
Too. Thank you, Kevin.
He was. I mean, had he not lost the title to Moxley, or I think I said this during our meeting as well, had he even beaten him the first time out and then lost the title to him, I think we could have been looking at a very different number 1. Jericho had, in many ways, and I don't want to. I know Brian has some thoughts about this. In many ways, the best year of his career, and I think in a lot of slightly altered universes, he could have been a good pick for number 1.
Yeah, and at I don't know if he's turned 50 yet, but I think this is the year that he does turn 50. To be having this kind of run at this point, and different than, like, let's say a PCO who was sort of only achieved a certain height throughout his career, and then at that 50 mark really exploded. Jericho's been, he had a Hall of Fame worthy career before this run. So he's a guy who already was at the top, and not just from a character standpoint or a promo standpoint, but athletically was doing incredible stuff throughout his career. And now around 50, where the reality is, physically he can't do what he used to do. He had to change his style. And in doing so, is still one of the best in the world. I mean, reinvented himself in a way where he could still outperform wrestlers half his age that can work a style that he can't anymore. Still at the very top of the sport. It's super, super impressive. Not number one, but maybe the most impressive impressive year of anybody in the top 10.
Yeah, I think he did have the best year of his career, and I mean that as an overall thing. Like I wouldn't argue that, definitely not in match quality. I mean, when he was younger, sure. I mean, yeah, he could do more, but I mean, in the overall package, and also, like we said before, in the way he was positioned, and I wrote my lockup column about that a couple of issues ago. It's the first time in all these years that he has been, or was at the time, the top guy in any company. I mean, even when he was WWE champion or world champion, he was not the top guy. Like, there were people that were positioned higher than him. So I really do think, this was his year. I mean, as incredible as it sounds for his age and everything. I also want to say that I think Jericho just has a history of enjoying poking fun at things that are written about him in magazines. Because I will say, I remember we used to have a feature called Fantasy Warfare when I was at Raw Magazine, where we would pit current stars against stars from the past. And we had this idea, well, we can't have the current guys win every time because it's so predictable. So we every once in a while they had to lose. So we had Jericho against Ricky Steamboat, and we had Ricky Steamboat go over. He went nuts. He emailed everybody. He emailed the editors, in promo style, tearing us apart, calling us ass clowns and all that stuff for for making him lose to Ricky Steamboat. It was just, we couldn't believe it was really happening. We're like, is this really happening? Is Chris Jericho cutting an email promo on us for Fantasy Warfare? I mean, he's just a cool guy, and I just think that. Just on a personal level, he deserves to have a year like this. He's a good, decent, cool guy, and it's good that happened for him.
So just like to add, I don't want to spend too long on Jericho because we want to at least get through the top 10 here. But one great thing about him is that he continually pushes himself to do new things, right? I mean, he has Fozzy, against all odds, Fozzy became this, and I not a knock on Fozzy's music, but they've been around a while. And then all of a sudden they're a big radio band. They play these big festivals, maybe sometimes when they shouldn't, Sturgis, but they have hit songs. I mean, like it's unbelievable that he would be able to do that while still being so successful as a wrestler. And then he went over to Japan, was a big deal there. He made Tanahashi tap out. I mean, that is a big deal. And I mean, in some ways, I mean, to tie it back to Japan, I mean, he talk about reinventing himself and adjusting his style. It kind of reminds me of what Great Muta did as Keiji Muto later in his career. I mean, he couldn't do as many moonsaults. He couldn't move around the ring as fast. So, like, you know what? I'm going to do more of a striking style, more of a slightly MMA-based style. That's what Muta did anyway. And Jericho has done the same thing. I mean, he invents a new finisher every couple of years, or at least adopts one. And he continually finds ways to change and step up his game and do things differently. And at this point in his career, he could absolutely coast and still do very well. And the fact that he chooses not to do that is why he's so great.
Yeah, agreed. I'll add one more. I remember interviewing him a few years back when he had just started his podcast and sort of asking him, like, why are you getting into the podcasting business? Where's the money to be made? Any of that? And he was ahead of all of it, and he saw that there was a potential there that I think a lot of people hadn't seen. And look, all these years later, how big that podcast is, how important it's been for the wrestling industry. When you think about the Jon Moxley interview and so many others, he was at the forefront of that. So yeah, a guy who's just absolutely, even at 50 years old, still a pioneer. Who is what are we up to, 4?
Number 4 is Drew McIntyre, which, if anything, speaks to the unconventional nature of this year. The guy who wins the Royal Rumble and then goes on to win the WWE Championship at WrestleMania is, in so many other years, a lock to be the number one in the 500, and he's number 4. So that says so much about how the landscape has changed. I think one of the things working against McIntyre being higher, and really the main thing, is that the first half of his year wasn't all that great. He had a lot of it's house shows, but he was losing at house shows constantly. He was a kind of a middling performer in terms of wins and losses anyway on Raw. But he showed something. He showed the thing that made WWE want to sign him again in the first place. I believe for the third time, right? I think he was released twice in the past, you said. But yeah, it's best year of his career in the last, the first 6 months of the year, essentially. So I think had his push started a little bit earlier, he could be a little bit higher, but I think number 4 is just about right for him.
Yeah, I agree that I think timing had a lot to do with it. We talked about Big E, and if they keep this trajectory on with Big E, and let's say he wins the Rumble and wins the world title at WrestleMania, come PWI 500 time next year, he'd definitely be a contender for number 1. But this wasn't a slow burn with Drew McIntyre. It sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, the first half of the year, as you touched on, wasn't he losing matches to like Ricochet and on house shows? I mean, he was in the mid card. He was low on the card, and then it was just like somebody had this epiphany. What if we go all the way with Drew McIntyre? And you certainly get it. Great looking guy, tall, muscular, can talk, can work. But that's been true for years, and it seems like it wasn't until January before they kind of had that realization over there. And since then, you really feel for the guy. We've talked about this a lot, Brian, doing everything right, I think, on his part. And I think that the booking of him has been pretty solid as well. He just happens to be the pandemic champion, right? So he is yet to get a crowd pop as the top guy, the WWE heavyweight champion. And so I think it's sort of limited. I don't know if limited is the word, but it I can't think of like another situation where however many months into a title reign that is already fairly long, because so often that WrestleMania title run, even for top babyface guys, you kind of make it to SummerSlam and then maybe you lose it at SummerSlam or around SummerSlam and you're back on the chase and you get it back. He's made it through all those pay-per-views, including SummerSlam, just getting clean win after clean win after clean win, putting over that Claymore kick strong. And yet, even all these months later, it feels like the jury's still kind of out. Is this working,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kevin, did you want to jump in? I saw you put your hand up. Well, I think that it goes back to that whole shadow, that cloud that's over everything, right? We don't really know how things are registering. I think somebody mentioned it before. It might have been Rosenberg on the pre-show. He said he compared the Roman Reigns thing with Paul Heyman to Andre the Giant and Bobby Heenan. And I think, I wouldn't put it there, but if it had been in front of a live audience, I think you're talking about like a major memorable moment, like oh my God, like looking back years later kind of a moment. And it wasn't quite that, right? Because of that. But I think Drew McIntyre, right? He's the pandemic champion. I think the biggest difference now, because Kevin, like you were saying, how much the landscape has changed and how a guy in his position would have been a lock for number 1. I think we have to remember, there were years where with the PWI 500, where WWE main brand Raw and SmackDown was, for all intents and purposes, the only show in town. You had TNA, you had Ring of Honor, but they were like distant seconds, really. And so they were so dominant. Now you've got the NXT brand. You've got AEW, which is like in the past year is a bigger deal than TNA Impact ever was, honestly. And so, it's not their roost to rule anymore. So I think there's just a wider field. There's more competition. And winning WrestleMania and the Royal Rumble and all that is no longer a lock to make you number 1, which is probably a good thing. It keeps it interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one of my big takeaways of the 500 this year. I know Harry wrote about it in his take. This sort of the year that WWE really kind of gave up that grip, that stronghold on certainly the top 10, but even the whole 500. There's really, like you touched on, that the top WWE a star isn't ranked until 4 is really telling. And there's a lot more parity on this list than probably since WCW was around, and maybe even more so because even back then it was really a 2 companies, and now it's several. With part of it is us kind of giving the respect due to New Japan, that even though New Japan's had better years than they have in the last year, and NXT really kind of coming on strong is more than just a developmental, and AEW, but even NWA does pretty well on this list. MLW, kind of a non-factor other years, is in the mix in the top 100. So really a fascinating year.
I would even add,
Yep.
I would even add on to that. A lot of the independents are being at a higher level, and part of that is having the ability to stream their events through, whether that's through the IWTV channel or through Fight. GCW is Game Changer Wrestling is huge right now as far as the independent circuit goes. A couple of really big promotions in the Midwest: Freelance Wrestling, Black Label Pro, Glory Pro. You've got a lot of major independents. So, I mean, you see some indie wrestlers who are probably a lot higher on the list than they may have been in previous years. These are interesting times, and I think you also have an opportunity for some of those wrestlers to step up because there was inactivity. I mean, you had WWE and AEW running, but for a while, New Japan was not running. For a shorter period of time, All Japan was not running, and a few of the other Japanese major promotions. Lucha Libre has been completely shut down for months in Mexico, right. So that's been a huge gap. And when you look at all that, and I mean, even these major promotions that you mentioned, the NWAs and MLWs and Ring of Honors of the world, I mean, those were largely shut down as well. So while it can be argued that maybe some of these smaller independents shouldn't have been running shows when they were, for safety reasons, they did. And I mean, from an in-ring standpoint, we had to recognize that.
Yeah. Who is number 5 this year?
So number 5, speaking of unfortunate situation due to COVID-19, is Tetsuya Naito. This was an incredible year for him. He had 2 reigns with the IWGP Intercontinental Championship, but more importantly, he won both championships, the 2 main singles titles in New Japan, the IWGP Intercontinental and Heavyweight Championships, which we now deem a World Championship. Back-to-back nights at Wrestle Kingdom, he beat Jay White, and then he beat Okada in the main event of night 2. Looked like he was going to have a really nice run there. And then shortly after that, I mean, he had 1 defense, I think, and then it shut down. And then, of course, after everything started back up, lost the title in very quick fashion to Evil, which kind of felt out of nowhere. Granted, Evil won the New Japan Cup tournament. What is interesting in these rankings is Evil's somewhere in the 100s. I mean, he did not have the best year of his career. And then, at the end of the evaluation period, he won that tournament. He won both of those championships. He's since lost them back.
Right.
Spoiler if you're not caught up on New
right.
Japan, but I mean, it's at least a few days old at this point. But yeah, I think Naito, had everything been normal, he could have, or had this happened. I think another thing when we were discussing this that you pointed out, maybe even before the actual official meeting, is New Japan didn't have the cultural cachet that it's had in previous years anyway. And a lot of that is because AEW has risen up as this major competitor to WWE. So New Japan is still a really big deal. Huge deal, but they've lost some stars and they've lost some star power with that. So I think had this happened a couple of years ago with Naito capturing both titles at the biggest show of the year, I mean, really internationally the second biggest wrestling show of the year, period. He could have done even better, but as it stands and given the circumstances of this year, I think nothing wrong with being number 5.
Yeah. I agree that Naito is probably affected as anyone on this list by the pandemic, and some of that is a testament to New Japan maybe handling this better than other promotions and being a lot more cautious and shutting everything down, even when the situation in Japan was a lot safer than here in the United States. They weren't playing any games, and they absolutely waited until they felt it was safe to put on some shows. But because of that, Naito's momentum just came to a grinding halt by March, and they didn't pick up again until July or August. I think they started running shows again, but it was past the
it was the end. It was the end of June that the New Japan Cup tournament started, but Naito was not.
But
back
even then, right?
Yeah.
Because essentially the cup was to decide his next challenger, so he was still sitting at home waiting to wrestle for like another month past that. And as you touched on, then goes and loses the title in his first match. So I think that all factors in. I think the other thing that factors in, this really goes back years, right? There's been like those top guys in Japan, and it's been Okada. At different times, it's been either Tanahashi or Omega. And then I feel like Naito's always been a rung below those guys, right? So in that top mix, but not at the very, very top. And over the years, they've put the title on him. And I feel like in doing that, and this is not a slight at all against everything he brings to the table. I still think he's one of the most charismatic and talented performers in the world, but up against guys like Okada and Omega and Tanahashi was always a kind of a notch below. So them going all in with him this year, and that combining with the inactivity from the pandemic, and then and this didn't factor into his slot here because it was after the evaluation period, but just kind of bigger picture talking about his year. The questionable decision of going with Evil for a 1-month title reign, just to put it back on Naito. I think his year has been kind of a hodgepodge, that different than the consistency that we've had when Okada's been at the top, where, it's just like you put the title on Okada, you're guaranteed 18-star matches every time in the main event. Less so this year. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what do you think about Naito's year, Brian?
I think, again, sort of like we've said with some of the other guys, this was kind of like his best year to be ranked. So I think he's kind of had the spotlight a little more to himself than he has in previous years. I also think it's interesting in general how, I have to say, just looking at the whole arc of PWI rankings over the years, I think that New Japan in general, even though they're not maybe as high profile as they were, say, a couple of years ago, in general these days, they're much more, these stars, guys like Okada and Tanahashi that we mentioned, and Naito, are much better known to average American wrestling fans than the New Japan stars were in years past, even when New Japan itself was a bigger deal in Japan than it is now. And so, like, these guys are very lucky to be at this time and at this place, because when the average American fan sees Naito's name in the top 10, they're going, yeah, he deserves to be there. Whereas, years ago when PWI would have Japanese guys ranked high, there were a lot of American fans that, they just knew about WWF and WCW, and they'd go, who are these guys? I don't even know who they are. So I think they've benefited from that as well. There's better visibility, New Japan making inroads in the United States, both on television and in live events. So I think that benefited him as well.
Yeah. Why don't we more quickly go through the second half of the top 10? Why don't you go ahead and tell us 6 to 10, and then maybe we could jump in with some thoughts about any of them. Yeah,
of course. So, appropriately at number 6, we have Kazuchika Okada, who was you want me to just list them first, and then we'll...
if you want to make a quick remark about each of them, that's fine, yeah, and then I guess we'll talk about some of them further.
So, Kazuchika Okada, who was the IWGP Heavyweight Champion through Wrestle Kingdom, some memorable title defenses, previous number 1 in the 500, first Japanese native and first New Japan wrestler to top the 500 as well, or second New Japan wrestler to top the 500. I messed that up. At number 7, we have Cody Rhodes, who, of course, vice president and huge deal in AEW in a lot of different ways. Number 8, we have Seth Rollins, who it might be easy to forget with the way he's been treated lately, but he had some big wins and world title reigns in the evaluation period. Number 9, Kofi Kingston, who again early in the period was a very big deal and a world champion. And then at number 10, we have AJ Styles, who until recently was Intercontinental Champion and had some other minor title reigns during the evaluation period.
Yeah. So my quick take, I think it's interesting that there's quite a drop off from the top half of the top 10 to the bottom half, where we are now sort of dealing with upper mid carders, right? And not top elite stars. Of those, Okada, I think has had kind of probably his most challenging year so far, or maybe disappointing year. Partly due to the pandemic, but also, I think some questionable booking, and he just hasn't had the opponents that he's had in past years to really shine against. Maybe that's a reflection of him being slotted in the mid card where he's not working with those top guys, but a little bit of a letdown. Did want to talk about Kofi Kingston, which was the one name that when we put on the top 10, I anticipated would raise some eyebrows, because last year I think he was number 4, something like that. I mean, he was certainly in that top 5, rightfully so. I think some people would look at his year within the evaluation period and think, really? But as you touched on, the evaluation period going July to July, there were still a few months of his title reign through SummerSlam, through him beating Randy Orton, getting some important wins early in the evaluation period as WWE champion, the most important title that you can hold really in the business. And AJ Styles, I feel like, has just kind of become a staple of the top 10. Doesn't matter what he does. He is universally respected as one of the very best in the world, whatever he's involved in. So, Brian, any thoughts on any of those names?
I think it's interesting to look at them now and think, well, I don't know if you agree with me, but for a lot of those guys, I think if we were doing a top 10 right now in this moment, they wouldn't have made it. I mean,
no.
So it's interesting to see how quickly things change. And I think it's so important that readers and people listening do keep in mind the evaluation period, because I think people often don't consider that, or they just sort of ignore it and they just think of like what's happening right now. You have to look at that evaluation period. And that's why, I would stand by any of those choices just based on that. Kofi Kingston, he's had a huge drop off, probably the biggest drop off of any of those 5 guys that we mentioned. But during that period, he deserved that spot. I mean, I wouldn't even put Seth Rollins in the top 10 now if we were doing a top.
I think people are a little unfairly harsh with Seth. I think he is still, you can make an argument for him being the number 2 guy on the Raw brand. He's consistent. He's a star. He's now making a star, or made a star, out of Dominic Mysterio. I think he gets a little bit of too much of a hard time. Very flawed. But I think kind of moving into that AJ Styles role too, where he's just great in the ring. I think a lot of that is people have personality issues with him, but the dude just delivers over and over again in the ring.
Yeah, credit needs to be given, of course, to Kingston on that part. Kofi Kingston's been amazing for years. One thing I do want to add real quick, not to completely sidetrack, but I did have it right the first time when I said Okada was the first New Japan.
Yes, Omega
number 1. It was yeah. I had that correct at first, and then I switched it. They were back-to-back years, and I had difficulty. Trust your gut, basically. But I think like we have people who did well at different parts of the evaluation period. People who were, Kofi was incredibly popular and inspirational as the first Black world champion WWE had in many years, and the first African-born world champion WWE had ever had. Rollins, lost a lot of matches, but at the same time, he had those wins over Lesnar, I think 2 during the evaluation period. He's always a focal point of Raw. love him or hate him, and he gets it done. And similarly, you have AJ Styles who's doing that over on SmackDown now, and then you have Cody Rhodes. And I mean, what's worth mentioning here, I believe his TNT. We definitely discussed this at the time, but it was right before the finals of the TNT title tournament. So that whole run was not even considered. I mean, this is largely.
But I think the win was because I remember putting together the top 5 moments, and I remember the win being in there. I think it was. Yeah.
Okay. You're probably right. But it's obviously when we were actually compiling this, we were looking at the dates on these, and we had the meeting before, and then we're sussing out some of the details later. But I mean, certainly his run defending that against all comers was not taken into consideration. So I mean,
right, yes,
pretty impressive without that for him to have still had this year based on his win-loss record and his influence in the wrestling business.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something Brian said about if essentially we were making the list right now, because that makes me think about who is in the number 11 slot, who if I've got the list correct, Keith Lee is number 11, right?
Yeah, and I think Keith Lee would easily be top 10 if that evaluation.
This was before he even won the NXT title. That we had him at that 11 spot, and since then won the NXT title, just beat Randy Orton 6 minutes on Sunday night clean. So looking ahead to next year, if things stay as they are, I'd think he's got a fair chance of breaking into that top 10 spot. Anybody else you think that if we were putting together the list right now would deserve a spot in the top 10 that isn't right now?
I mean, Reigns jumps out because Reigns he was number 14, and his, he just, of course, won the Universal title, and he's once again the focal point of SmackDown. So I think somebody who I think would go lower, we have Brock Lesnar at 12, and I mean, it's feeling more and more like a distant memory, and now reportedly done with WWE, which doesn't, by itself mean anything, but I think like if we were doing this now, he would be a lot lower. So
would Impact maybe be doing a little better? I mean, couldn't Eddie Edwards find his way into the top 10?
So I don't know about the top 10 because it hasn't been that long of a reign just yet. But I will say that Impact did not fare super well overall in here, and that was not helped by the shutdown and the fact that Tessa Blanchard wasn't really able to have that memorable reign that she almost certainly could have. And we tentatively had her a lot higher, and then with her future in question, we did move her lower. But even if you look at the other people who were on the list from Impact, I mean, the Sami Callahans, and then from the X division, like the Willie Macks and the Ace Austins, I think those guys would not be top 10 necessarily, but they would be much higher because Impact has this momentum now, and it's a lot of people think it's the best weekly show. Now, I mean, there's a lot of great wrestling out there. That's a tough discussion, but certainly the company's doing great. And we there's this perception that we don't like Impact at PWI, but I mean, we try to call it fairly, and when the company is doing well and wrestlers are doing well within the company, we want to recognize that. And I think even next year, you're going to see a big difference.
I really agree. And I think on any given week, you're right. Impact's got the best show on TV. Not every week, but sometimes they do. And it just feels, what we've wanted out of Impact for so long was for them to just settle on something that was unique, different than WWE, not a copy. And it does feel, I think the losing Tessa Blanchard was sort of a blessing and a curse in that Tessa Blanchard was their calling card. And I don't want to call her a publicity stunt, but it was the one thing that you could point at that made them unique was they had the female heavyweight champion. And then losing that, I think they were forced to look at, all right, what do we have here? What is our roster? Who are our top guys? And then the other thing that I think they benefited from was all the firings in WWE, which typically you would not advocate for, the former TNA to just go pick up all these ex-WWE guys and push them. But a lot of those were ex-TNA guys first. And they were wrestlers who I think a lot of fans thought didn't get a fair shake in WWE. So seeing an Eric Young come back to Impact and get a push at the top, and seeing what they're doing with the EC3, it feels like they actually have a better grasp of the upside of some of these talents than WWE had. So I think I don't know it, but I think it's really possible to see Impact make a return to the top 10 next year. Especially if they get some fans back in the building at some point and liven up those shows. Brian, any thoughts on Impact or anybody else that maybe would belong in the top 10 if we were putting it together right now?
One person that I might consider, and I don't know, maybe I'll catch heat for this, and this is not going, if we go by just winning matches, and maybe not so much, but in terms of how he's being positioned right now, I would be thinking about MJF as a possible low top 10 name. That's one that jumped out to me.
Could be the world champion by the end of the week, and that'll certainly change things.
Promos he's been doing, the whole, just top notch, really good, really just, he's carrying himself like a top guy right now, and he's performing that way just as an all around character. I think, a lot of people have said this, I'm not the first one, but he has enormous potential. He's so young, like he's going to be a major fixture for like the next 10-15 years for sure.
A couple names that we haven't brought up who have held world titles not only since the end of the evaluation period, but actually during the evaluation period. Bray Wyatt, The Fiend, and Braun Strowman, neither of them made it to the top 10. And I don't know that they would now either,
I thought about maybe The Fiend, but no.
Yeah, his second title reign was a week long, and I think the reality is in both their cases, there's just so much left to be desired in their work in the ring. In Braun's case, I think it's partially the limitations of being that big and still relatively new in the business. I don't know that he's got 5 years wrestling. And I think he's come a long way in those 5 years, but still needs some polishing, some developing. And in Bray Wyatt's case, I think it's just being saddled with that character, which I get that I'm sure they're selling a lot of masks and stuff like that, but I feel like in the ring it's such a hindrance. And that hurts him. One other thing, and I don't want to go too much longer. We're already over an hour here, and we want to get to the Jon Moxley interview. But one thing I've heard from some fans about, and some of them a little confused, is about how many women are on the list this year. And I know we've talked about combining or the potential to one day combine the PWI 500 and the women's 100. And there are some fans who think we already have. I had to clarify with them that we did not this year. But can you talk, Kevin, a bit about what is different this year with the role of women on the 500?
Yeah, it is confusing. I get why people are confused. Even after I first announced on Twitter, people were tweeting part of the larger thread, and I think that didn't help with the misunderstanding. So we could have certainly been clearer. Of course, you have women wrestlers who are certainly in WWE are among the top stars, if not the top stars. They're kind of anchoring the show at this point. And if it were a merged list, I think, the case could be made to put them up top. But for the time being, there's an overall lack of opportunities for women wrestlers to fare well on the 500, to win the secondary titles, and many other promotions, the tag titles, the tournaments that help so many of the wrestlers do well. And there's one big exception to that, and it's not Impact, where although intergender wrestling is part of the equation, it's not the top thing they do. It's not the only thing. The independent scene. And that's why you see so many women. I think we have 15 ranked this year. And we've never had, I don't believe we've ever had more than one. And someone, if please write it. And
we probably had
maybe two.
I bet we've had more than one year, but I don't think we ever had even 5.
No.
Yeah.
And we've had a hard and fast rule against any women on the list for the past. I think Sarah Del Rey was the last who ranked, and she was did not have a great 500 ranking because she didn't really have any, at least any men's championships or traditionally men's championships. And I believe she was number 2 in the women's list that year, which was, I think, only still 50 at the time. So, I mean, it remains to be seen whether we're going to completely merge these, but I think it would be ridiculous to not acknowledge the fact. I mean, how could you have Impact wrestlers ranked and then not have their heavyweight champion ranked? I mean, It seems strange to do that. And then if you extend that to the independent scene, you have these promotions like Kylie Ray is the highest ranked woman on the list at 78, I believe it is. I'll scroll and try and check that while I'm talking. 78. So actually outranking Tessa because she was more consistent in terms of accomplishments, not just as a women's wrestler, but in these Midwestern independents and holding multiple championships. And if you're going to recognize anybody from those promotions, it's got to be the biggest stars, right? So that, taken to its logical conclusion, we had 15 women ranked throughout the entirety of the list. And I mean, if the major promotions pick up and start doing more intergender matches, I think that brings us closer to a merged list and the lack of a need for a women's only list. But as it stands, I mean, it's 2 of them, and we're going to put the question out there at some point and see what our readers think and our podcast listeners think. But for now, that's how we're approaching it. And there's a past episode, the virtual roundtable with the Bell to Bells, Kristen Ashley and Harmony Cox, and you can go listen to that if you want to hear a longer discussion on that with the 3 of us.
Yeah. I've certainly been taken aback in putting both or helping put together the 500 and also the women's 100, and so much of it is looking up matches, on YouTube or what have you from some of these stars and seeing how often it is a woman against a man, and this was so taboo just a few years ago. And now, as you touched on, particularly in the independents, it's become really commonplace. And so, as you said, I mean, if the top star in a company or one of the top stars beating all their competition, regardless of gender, is a woman, then why would we exclude her from the list just because of her gender? So I think it makes sense. Not really a departure from any of our criteria, more just kind of a realization, I would think. So, yeah. Okay. Any closing thoughts on any of this? Another fun, challenging PWI 500 to put together.
Yeah, I think it set a new standard. I'm looking forward to how we can kind of build on that in future years and make it even better.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining this. Right now, as promised, you can read a portion of this in the latest PWI in our hot seat interview. It is my interview with this year's #1 ranked wrestler and the AEW World Heavyweight Champion, Jon Moxley. So let's jump into it. Congratulations on being the 2020 PWI 500 #1 ranked wrestler. I'm always interested when I talk to wrestlers who I know were fans as kids and came up through the business for a long time, what their memories of the PWI 500 are, either as reading the magazine as a kid or starting off as in the independents and seeing yourself climb through the ranks. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, cool. What makes it cool is those magazines, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Inside Wrestling, all the different ones, the 5 or 6 different titles that would be at the newsstand. Those are really part of my early education of wrestling. When I was a kid, like in the mid 90s, the internet was not as much of a pronounced thing as it is now, where everybody has smartphones and computers and stuff. Back then, I didn't even have a computer, So the extent of anything that went on behind the scenes, or any extra look closer at what wrestling was for me, was the magazines at the newsstand. When a new one came out, I would just sit there at the newsstand and thumb through every single detail and pour through every single detail of them. That was my first exposure to, my whole universe was basically whatever WWF tapes they had or whatever they had at the video store early days. and whatever was on like WWF Superstars. So it was kind of the first exposure to me of like pictures from like the NWA or like somehow half the magazine would be like in color, but then half of it would be like black and white. And you see the black and white bloody photos of like first time I would have seen something like Superstar Billy Graham. I didn't know what that was, you know? So like I was starting to learn the history of wrestling and the other promotions, NWA and this and that. First time I ever read the names from Japan, because you look in the back of the rankings and you see like rankings in Japan, the Great Muta, Kensuke Sasaki, and you're like, who are those guys? I got to figure that out. So like, it was kind of early education. Was for me was those magazines.
Yeah.
How about that almanac thing came out? It was like, am I misremembering this? I think because I believe there was like something called an almanac.
Sure.
It had all the old like all the pay-per-view results and all the title histories, and like. I'd be a little kid. I would like write that stuff down. Like, I don't know what purpose, but you know, back then kids had imaginations. Now they got fucking PlayStations. But so I would like just write down all these title histories and memorize these results for whatever reason, you know. And so a lot of my early education was those magazines. I was obsessed with them. And because I do a lot of like going to flea markets and scouring for any wrestling tapes I could find. And if I found like an old magazine, I'd collect them all. I had like stacks of magazines, and I would just pour through every single detail I could of those things.
Yeah. How about when you started coming up in the business? Do you remember the first time seeing yourself on the 500? For what it's worth, it was in 2006, and you ranked at 447.
I imagine at the time I was probably pretty excited that my name was in the magazine. Just, you know, what a novelty concept. Like, you know, when you're like a little kid and it's just a dream and you're imagining it, you know, to first time, I don't care what anybody says, first time you see your name in print somewhere, you know, it's pretty cool. No matter what, it could be the local newspaper. You get pretty excited about it.
Yeah. So did we get this right? I mean, are you the best wrestler of the last 12 months?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to pat myself on the back, really, or at this point right now, you know, these days I'm wrestling for me. You know, I'm not really looking for any external validation from anybody or anything like that. But it is pretty cool to what I was kind of at mentally at the beginning of 2019. It's pretty low. So to be like 2020 when I'm sitting at now, it's like it's pretty awesome. And you know, it's to be number one. The thing is like the coolest thing about it, like I said, is like that was those magazines were such a big part of my childhood, and it was like such a dream, you know. And it just goes to show that like no matter who you are, where you come from, you know, no matter how poor you are, no matter what area you come from, you know, I was a kid that like. You know, back when I was reading those magazines, you know, I was like quiet kid, got picked on. I was like in special classes because they're trying to like diagnose me with like all these social anxiety disorders and stuff. And like I had to get mocked for watching wrestling, you know, and to be like, at that point, it's just like this fanciful dream and everybody thinks you're crazy, you know, but if you want it bad enough and you know, go ahead and chase your dreams, man, because it just goes to show that anything can happen.
Yeah. You mentioned, you know, being at that low point early last year, and I thought about that a lot in putting your part of this magazine together, your bio, and remembered a lot to the Chris Jericho podcast interview where, you know, there's a young man there who really seemed hell-bent, not on proving yourself, because I think you already had, but showing. You know, you talked about the WWE system being broken and proving that there was a better way. Does this feel like some kind of a vindication that you achieved this level of success, you know, outside of WWE without those boundaries that you never did while you were there? To
a point, like there is some of that there, but I try to just like be a trying to maintain the same kind of mindset I had when I originally left. You know, my thought was I was just going to kind of disappear for a while, like go to Japan, maybe wrestle under a mask. I don't know, basically just be low key. Like I wasn't trying to like before I left, this is how my mindset was. I was like, I'm just going to go kind of take myself off Broadway and just kind of start over and get back to just wrestling for the love of it and like figure it all out again. And then once I kind of like, you know, I'll come up with a new style or a new look or whatever, a new presentation, the whole thing, whatever. And then maybe a year later after that, maybe I'll come back on like the national scene. It didn't go like that at all. Mm-hmm. It went to popped immediately into right in everybody's faces. And every single thing I was doing was like, had a giant magnifying glass on it. So every single, which turned out to be cool, you know, in a different way. Like but I tried to maintain just the mindset of like, I'm just wrestling because it's just a blessing and a joy to be a pro wrestler, and I'm pretty good at it. And let's just have fun, man. So like, and yeah, it's been, you know, pretty cool. You know, doing the G1 was awesome. To you know, the absolute toughest, best, top tier food chain wrestling tournament in the world. To do that was like what a challenge. Like I had to. I was like, well, I didn't plan on it, but as soon as they floated the idea to me, I was a little bit like, I don't know, man, that's pretty tough. And then I immediately went, well, now I have to do it. Because I'm not going to back down from a challenge. Like, no, I have to, whether it's a good idea or not. And I was real proud of my whole performance there. What a chance to work with all these different opponents and wrestle these different styles. Really fell in love with the Japanese style and wrestling over there. I love those fans, you know. So, and really, it's just I just got to thank, you know, AEW and New Japan both for just giving me the platform to just go out there and just be myself and do what I do. And the end result was pretty freaking good.
Is it sort of humbling that, again, you leave WWE where you're not featured at the top and now kind of have to find your own way? And you're thinking, yeah, I'll string some dates together here and there while I kind of figure out what's next for me. And instantly, as you just touched on, you know, all these promotions want you badly and want to feature you at the very, very top, right? So AEW, upstart promotion that everything was so important as far as getting it right in their freshman year, push you right to the top before long, you know, put the title on you, don't have you lose a singles match. New Japan too, you know, where you don't have all that experience, they take you and they're so protective of their talent and their talents, you know, win-loss records, and they bring you over there, put a title on you, you string together all these victories in G1. Again, sort of humbling for you that you were seen that way. Did you realize that you had that reputation coming out of WWE?
I didn't really know, like, when I kind of hatched my plan that I was going to leave was probably in July of 2018. So, I mean, it was I had a long time to think about it. And, you know, I didn't really know where I was going to fit in or what, or anywhere, you know, I didn't really, and I was keeping all my cards close to the vest, you know, so it wasn't like I wasn't talking to anybody. Like nobody knew my plan really except my wife until I told Vince I was leaving. And then like, it was, so I was kind of, like I said, I was just kind of like, they have a way of just taking what makes you special and just like ripping it away. And they make everybody automatons. And I'm not here to do this to talk trash on them. I'm quite honestly sick of talking about them. But, you know, I really didn't know. Yeah, I couldn't picture what it was going to be. You know, but it was exciting because I was like, man, this is awesome. I could do indies. I could make my own schedule. I could go to Japan. I could literally do anything. And this is before AEW was even in the picture. I was just excited about like, hey, we'll just go out there and see what the world has to offer, and but I'll be in control, so be my own boss. Like that's exciting.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know everything that was going to be on the table. But it was a day or two after I told them I was leaving, rumors started to circulate or whatever. I think when I was driving back from a show in Phoenix, I guess it was the same night because I was driving back from a show in Phoenix. And by the time I woke up in the morning, my phone was just blasted with just like a million texts and calls, and just from every single person you can imagine. Some people just want to know what's up, but basically I was like, whoa, like just based on rumors of me possibly leaving, I got a lot of options already. Like pretty much literally everybody in the world was just like throwing money at me just based on the rumors. So I was like, oh, I think this is going to work out pretty good. And the AEW, so that was humbling, to answer your question, because at that moment, because I was like, oh, like there is a whole world outside of like when you're at TV, like it's like for some reason they want to make you feel like you suck and you're not talented and you have to do it their way. But like, it's like, oh yeah, there is this whole other world out there, and there's a bunch of people who think I might actually be pretty good at this. So they would like me to come in. Like, that's pretty cool. So yeah, that was humbling too, and even like I said, even New Japan give me a call out of the blue and being like, hey, you have any interest in coming in here? I'm like, hell yeah. Cause I knew I wanted to go to Japan, because that's been my favorite place to wrestle, because I just love the fans over there. I love the style. I love that you can just wrestle and take your time and do more technical stuff, and they appreciate the sport and the art of it. I just, I love the fans in Japan. It was always my favorite. The shows I look forward to the most will be when we go to Sumo Hall once a year on WWE. I look forward to that more than WrestleMania. I could give a fuck about WrestleMania. I was so excited for the Japan tour every year. I got hyped. Like, I would go balls out on those shows, because I was, especially I had in the back of my head an idea that like one day I might be coming back here, and it was like kind of felt a kinship with the fans. I was like, I think I could really like do well here, like wrestling for like a Japanese company. Like, I had it kind of in my head, but I didn't know if it was going to be New Japan, or I figured like they're the top company. They probably got a million guys trying to get in there.
Yeah,
that might not work out. I don't know. They might have too many guys already, but they called me. So I was like, hell yeah, and then they're like, I mean, do you want? I'm like, me,
right.
Okay. Hell yeah. Let's do it. So, and then, but yeah, AEW, then the AEW thing came into the picture, and that's like, ooh, now it's real interesting. And now it's like like before it was about me just getting out on my own, just getting back to being happy and being a pro wrestler again, and just getting back to why I love this in the first place. And then it became, now AEW's in the picture. Now it's like, ooh, now here's a chance to like really shake things up and like change the business for the better. Right. And like now the mood has changed, so to speak. Now it's like I'm like, like the timing of everything was so spooky. Like, for instance, I last contract with them in September of 2015. And then they tacked on like 9 more months to it because I had an injury. So that made it the end of April 2019. AEW's first show was like 3 weeks after that. So like the timing was crazy, where it was like all the signs in the universe. The show was even in my own hometown. I didn't have to get on a plane. Like, all the signs in the universe were like pointing that like, that's it, and if there was going to be like one guy to like really pop it off on that first night with a shocking thing,
right.
I think I was a perfect guy, and it just all worked out like that. And Tony, at first, first you hear about it, you go like, well, we've heard of a million promotions that are going to start up and they got funding and this and that, but it never comes to pass. So, it all sounds really good. Tony sat at my kitchen table and laid out the TV was going to happen and this and that. And this is way when it's all top secret. And we just talked about wrestling, talked about what's cool, what's not cool, how we're going to do stuff, how we're going to present it, what his vision was. And I was like, well, this is where I'm at, what I want to do in the coming, like, this is where I'm at mentally, and this is what I'm looking to do. So does that line up with what you're going to do? Like, and it's like, perfect. And like, we agreed on what we agreed on, and we didn't even talk money at all. We're just like, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing some other stuff too. You know what I mean? I got like movies and stuff I'll be doing, but mainly I was like, I just want to be a pro wrestler. And that's the platform they give me to do that, and I'm glad that, grateful to be able to, bring whatever name value I have or whatever experience I have in live TV and to help get this company off the ground. And I think like we've just far exceeded anybody's expectations. And it's just a real blessing.
Did it take some adjusting on your part? I mean, as you touched on, you leave WWE and now your mindset is really yourself, right? So what's best for me? What are the opportunities? What are things that I've always wanted to do that I can do now? And before you know it, you're back working for a company, and part you have to kind of shift into that team mentality where it's what's best for the company and especially one that is just getting started, and things like ratings and attendance and all of that. So did that happen at some point where it became less about you and more, at least in part, about AEW and the team?
It's kind of been like a real kind of team environment atmosphere kind of since the beginning, because I think everybody understands that kind of like we got something really cool here and everybody's excited about it. And I think the reason for that is just like a lot of that locker room, like they had already been working together for years. They're already friends, whether they worked in Ring of Honor or wherever. A lot of those guys I didn't know, and a lot of guys I'd known years before and just hadn't seen them in a while. It's a group of guys that like, even if they weren't getting paid, they would still be wrestling. It's a group of guys that just love wrestling. Everybody just wants to go out there and kick ass, and like there's no selfishness. Everybody just wants to be like have the best show possible and play their role to the hilt. So like for me, it's like if they want me to be in the first match, 10th match, you want me to do a hardcore match, cage match, Iron Man match, you want me to do a tag match, whatever it is, like cool, I can do everything. So let me know what's best for however I can best contribute, and I brought like kind of like wild card character kind of guy coming out of the crowd with a barbed wire baseball bat kind of thing at any moment. I brought that kind of unpredictability. I think that was kind of a thing that I brought to Dynamite right from the get-go, is just kind of that kind of a live wire kind of thing. And, I honestly never expected to be positioned as a good guy. I kind of figured like I was coming in, throw Kenny off the thing. I'm an asshole. Before I got to WWE, almost my entire career was always a bad guy. Was always an antagonist. And I always thought like I did my best work like that, being aggressive. That's just the way I wrestle. Like it's a fight, being an aggressive antagonist is kind of where I thought I would be at, but somehow I ended up a good guy again, which is cool because, I got a great relationship with the fans. So it's like, oh, you need me to play a good guy role? Cool. I can do that. Whatever's best for the show. So, Jericho had one of the biggest matches in AEW yet because he's such a great champion and built it up. The good guy against the bad guy, classic pro wrestling thing, and it's so much fun at AEW because it's like I'm just so like comfortable in the role because I'm just being myself and I just go out there. Just give me a mic. I say whatever I want. They don't give me a script. There's a direction, but it's like, if I have an idea, we can actually do it. I don't have to send it through 57 lines of bureaucratic red tape. I had so many ideas and pitched so much stuff for so many years that they just wouldn't listen to me. Or if they took it, by the time it goes through 20 different people and gets back, it's not even your idea anymore. It's like some really watered down version of your original idea. Like, now I can just if I have an idea, we can just do it, and, or maybe, we collaborate and they come up with an even better idea. And it's like, cool. There's a lot of collaboration. It's just fun.
Because it's been so much fun and you've been able to accomplish all of these kind of life goals in AEW and in New Japan in 2019, has it made the last few months especially difficult, having the plug pulled on all of this? Now the super red hot crowds that you were performing in front of every week on Dynamite are not there. You don't get to go to Japan at all for the last several months. So has it been really kind of deflating? And on top of, your wife dealing with it firsthand.
Yeah. I mean, everybody in the world's, deflated, whether in pro wrestling and the rest of the world. And I mean, it's literally something that's affected the entire world. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it sucks because the AEW red hot crowds and just the really awesome audience of people who just want to go have a good time, watch wrestling. It's a party atmosphere. They love being a part of the show. The fans are as big a part of our show as any of the wrestlers. So not having them sucks for right now. But we will be back, and it'll be hotter than ever eventually when the world becomes a safer place. And for me, the audience is a big part of. Really, they're a big part of my presentation. Coming out of the crowd, having that. When I'm in there, like when I'm not trying to I don't like put myself over kind of thing, but like when I come out, place goes fucking nuts. So it's part of the atmosphere, so when you don't have that, that's not ideal, but
it's a hard
we've really figured out how to, we were adapting and adjusting and doing the best we can to try to give it the liveliest atmosphere we possibly can. And I assure you, everybody's working their tails off every single night. Nobody's when we're still live on TV, so it's like we're still out there busting our asses, have the best show possible. There's still same amount of effort and creativity going into it. One day the crowds will be back and it'll be even better. 2020 for me was at the beginning of 2020, I was looking at it actually I it was almost it was weird because I think I said it on a podcast. Somebody said the way it's looking right now, I was 2020 is going to be the best year of my career because it was just one thing after another, kind of just good situations I looked into or things I manifested myself. Minoru Suzuki was a dream match for me. Guy I never really thought I'd have a chance to wrestle, but kind of he said something and I went, oh, fuck you, something on Twitter or some bullshit. I don't even know. I kind of manifested it in interviews and stuff. And it was a dream match fans wanted to see. So from the beginning of the year, it was Tokyo Dome, Texas Death Match with Lance Archer at Wrestle Kingdom, crazy moment with Minoru Suzuki at the Tokyo Dome. Then it was we're doing the whole storyline with Jericho. We're doing good stuff every week. I'm stealing his car. He pokes my eye out. All that. That was all great. The match with Jericho, win the title. The match with Suzuki, back and forth to Japan. I was really going really hard, going back and forth and busting my ass every week, going through the inner circle, wearing a fucking eye patch, the whole deal. So it was 2020 was one good thing right after another. And it was going to be more and more. And I had plans. My 2020 was going to be the busiest. I was going to be the busiest wrestler in the world. because I was going to be going back and forth Japan some. Dynamite every week. I was going to be wrestling like I had all these different cool shows I was going to do. So I wrestled Josh Barnett. I was going to go to Ireland, England. We're going to have an AEW UK tour. Like I was going to be doing cool, different, bigger indie shows, kind of touring the world. Like I was going to be busy as hell. Like it was going to be I was going to do everything on the menu. Like you only live once, and like strike while the iron's hot. So like I was going to be all over the place all year long. But then it was just like shut down, like shut down. So
is that still the plan when the world gets back to normal, or have your priorities changed at all, or again, you just want to go right back to what that plan was?
I mean, that'll be so long, and who knows what that process of the world getting back to normal, like as far as like safety and travel bans, and I have no idea how that all's gonna shake out or whatever. But I think the priority remains the same. Just be grateful that I get to do the job that I love to do for a living and do it the best I can, you know, and work my ass off for the people that, you know, give me the opportunity and the platform to do it. You know, right now, just sole focus is AEW and being the best pro wrestler I can be out there every week. And it's you know, I'm determined. I've been determined throughout this whole thing to not feel sorry for myself, like at all. Because it sucks to like win the title on a Saturday, and then that following Wednesday is the last time we're ever in front of people. Yeah. Like it just, you know, I want to come out in front of 20,000 people and like defend the title in front of 20,000 people, but like I'm not going to complain. Like there's people out there that are going through actual hard times, that are losing their jobs, that have been furloughed, that their family's sick, or even worse, maybe they lost people. There's people like so badly affected by this that like I'm not going to cry because like we can't wrestle in front of fans. Like that's a small sacrifice. And, you know, so I'm determined to not, bellyache about anything. You know, I'm very, very fortunate and blessed. You know, my wife had it, but she got through it. You know, I never got it somehow. So I don't know how. I thought for sure I would, but somehow I avoided it. So I'm a very, very, very blessed.
Absolutely, yeah. So one, a couple more here. One thing you did over your year that was not universally praised, but certainly got a lot of attention, was the match with Kenny Omega. And one thing that sort of lingered is, you know, the hardcore stuff. Is he doing too much of it? Is there really an appetite for this in pro wrestling in 2020? Looking back on that match, do you still feel good about it? Did some of the feedback on that one change at all the way you approached your wrestling style?
I feel great about it. Not at all. Like, I knew the night before, I was like, oh man, a lot of people are going to hate this. But like, you're going to, you're all in, you're all out, you know? And that's what I saw was the drive of Kenny Omega to like, because none of that was my idea. I was like, we're doing like first time we ever wrestled, we're doing because I mean, there was like a reason for it, was the way the booking of the title match was like a screwy finish. So we were going last as the lights out. But basically I was like, if we're going to do it, yeah. I mean, and he wanted to go balls out. So I was like, hell yeah. All right, cool. Like, not everybody's going to like everything you do, but like, that's why there's different flavors of ice cream. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. What one last
like,
question?
I unapologetically like that style of like, I watch Big Japan death matches and stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's crazy. But I understand that like a lot of people are not going to be into that at all. But I like watching it. And there is you can have like athleticism and storytelling and all that, like but just take it to like another level of, like, I like that, stuff. So
has there been pushback?
But I would never push it on anybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if you're like, not for me, cool. Like, totally cool. Like, it really is, And one day maybe I'll be in a regular match that you do like, and cool, but
Yeah. Well, that one was even for people who like that style, that was a bit much for some folks. I think typically you do find that middle ground. But is there a lot of pushback from AEW, or has there been pushback from AEW on we need to tone this down a bit? Is it you pushing for more of that kind of thing, and getting some editing on the other side?
No, actually, it's kind of the opposite.
Really? Okay.
Like I said, I was actually a little like, why are we having a street fight type match in our first match? Like, that's a little. But then I'm like, okay, like a lot of everybody thinks like that was all my brainchilds probably, but like you'd be amazed though. I was like, really? We can do that? Cool. All right. But I'm in. All right. Like, let's go. But I didn't dream up like I wouldn't, because I wouldn't assume AEW would want that on their show.
Right.
So I would never come up to Tony and be like, dude, I'm gonna stab a dude in the face with barbed wire, because I would assume he wouldn't be into that. But when I'm presented like, hey, you're gonna have a barbed wire bat, okay, cool. Like, I'm gonna do it. Like, let's go.
Yeah, that was sort of the narrative, was that it was Kenny Omega wrestling a Jon Moxley match, but it sounds like it actually was the other way around. Yeah,
it's like when you get that's another cool thing about wrestling is different guys create different what do you call it? There's a different combustion. And when you get the long form kind of, Kenny Omega's kind of a classical music, long form storytelling. And I'm kind of thrash metal, in your fucking face, 3 minutes. But when you combine thrash metal and symphony, then you get what we got, which I think I thought it was a fucking beautiful fucking match. There's a lot of people that's their favorite match they've ever fucking seen, so it's but you can't worry about it, man.
Yeah. One last question that sort of WWE related, but not really, and hopefully gets you to say good things. And that I realized today that you, Seth, and Roman have all been number one on the PWI 500. I don't think it's ever happened as far as even a tag team, much less three guys who came into the national spotlight together, all achieving this success at the very top. What does that say about the three of you?
I think it's indicative of when we came in, it was a different atmosphere in the locker room. It was a lot harder for young guys to. I don't know what it's like there now, but it was a lot harder for young guys to really get a shot to move up the card. There was or to even get out of developmental was tough. It was like we were on an island at FCW, hoping maybe every once in a while somebody gets off the island, but you're probably just going to die here on this island. And so we had a lot of pent up kind of aggression and stuff, because me and Seth thought we were having the best matches in the company down in FCW, and nobody was paying attention, and we were getting so we had a chip on our shoulder kind of thing. And so we come in with this attitude and chip on our shoulder, and a lot of people don't like us, and but we stuck together, and we all knew that we could all be top stars kind of thing. And it shows that we were right when we were driving together in the car, and we had an all for one for all attitude, and we all knew we were gonna fucking shake up this thing and take it over, and we're not gonna be stopped. I think it shows that we were right all those years later.
Yeah. Anyhow, congratulations, John. Well earned. Happy to see you achieve this, and thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man.
All right, man. Take care.
Later.